Council's Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Mike Deacon, Chair of the committee, and before we turn to our agenda, I'd just like to say a few introductory words. Firstly, there is no test of the fire alarm this evening, so if it sounds, please consider it to be for real and leave the building by the nearest fire exit and gather at the Raduna Park sign. If you need help to leave, evacuation chairs and assistance are available. Please do not re-enter the building until we are told it's safe to do so by the fire service or facilities management. For the benefit of those watching at home, this meeting is being conducted physically in the Deben room of our Melton offices and remotely using Zoom, with the two parts of the meeting being broadcast live on our YouTube channel. Please can I ask those in the room to speak directly and clearly into the microphone and to also switch it off when you finish speaking. A few words to explain the committee's role. An effective overview and scrutiny committee helps to secure the efficient delivery of public services and can help to drive improvements within the council itself. It is also required to act as a counterbalance to the power of the cabinet, and we adopt a constructive friend approach and through our reviews aim to add value wherever possible. So moving on to item number 1 on our agenda is apologies and substitutions. We have apologies from Councillor Molyneux, Councillor Leach, Councillor Bennett, who will be late, but he should be arriving anytime soon. Is there anybody else there? So that's it. And I'd also like to welcome Councillor Bennett, Cabinet Member with responsibility for housing. I wonder, could I ask the officers that are present to introduce themselves? And if we start with Michelle Burdett, if you'd like to.
You'd know that by now, wouldn't you? Michelle Burdett, Strategic Director for Housing and Economic Development.
Good evening, Heather Fisk, Head of Housing.
Good evening, Fern Lincoln, Strategic Lead for Housing Needs.
Good evening, everyone. Yonald Colelli, Operation Lead for Housing Needs.
Thank you.
Sarah Davis, Democratic Services Officer, Support Officer to the committee, and I'm supported today by my colleague Agnes, who is acting as host. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Does anybody have any declaration of interest? Any members? Nope. Then we move on to item number 3, then the minutes of the meeting we held on the 18th of June. First of all, are there any comments in relation to the minutes? Nope. So then may I have a proposal? Sorry.
Yes, it was a comment, page 6. The chair thanked the leader and reminded the committee that, and halfway down there it said, Suffolk County Council had submitted a judicial review letter, etc. And they mentioned that it was challenged on the basis that it wasn't a 500,000 residential, and we also discussed the fact that it didn't also use the existing borough and district council boundaries, which was a part of the white paper. That was discussed during the course of that conversation and doesn't seem to have been captured. Thank you.
Well, I'm afraid I wasn't in the chair that day. Mark. I've slept in there, so I can't. You comment.
Thank you, Chair. It was a comment from memory. I can obviously look back at the recording, but from memory, it was a comment made by the leader. And I can't say that I do recall her mentioning about the borough and district boundaries, because there was a specific comment, I think, that you made as Chair, Councillor Jepson, that we weren't actually discussing the boundaries.
Yes, I do recall that part of it, and we did make that very clear on the night, didn't we?
Okay.
I think the point was that it was where what has transpired deviated from what the white paper advised at the beginning. And it was the population size, and it was how the building blocks would be used. Just an observation.
Yeah. I'm sorry, can I ask you to investigate on the recording? Yeah. Yeah, so can we agree in principle and come back to you on that one? We'll have a look at the recording. So would somebody like to propose, please? Councillor Jepson, Councillor Lynch, the second. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. We move on then to one of the substantive issues today. Sorry, no, it isn't. It's the matters arising update sheet, which you've got in front of you, and it's simply for noting. And item number 5, we will move on to a substantive part of the agenda, a review of temporary accommodation procurement and placement strategy 26 and 29. And I'd like to invite Cabinet Member with Responsibility, Councillor Bevan, to open the debate or discussion.
Evening. I'm pleased to present the draft temporary accommodation procurement and placement strategy 2026 to 29. This strategy updates our previous approach and responds to the significant pressures we're experiencing across the homelessness system. Demand for temporary accommodation has increased substantially in recent years, and at the same time, rising costs and our reliance on nightly paid accommodation are creating increasing financial pressures for the council. This strategy sets out a more proactive and sustainable approach. It focuses on preventing homelessness wherever possible, increasing the supply of suitable accommodation, reducing reliance on costly nightly paid and out of area placements, and improving outcomes for residents. It also strengthens our ability to meet our statutory duties while improving financial resilience. By investing in more cost-effective accommodation options and improving flow through the system, we aim to provide better quality, more local accommodation for households experiencing homelessness. Ultimately, this strategy is about ensuring that some of our most vulnerable residents have access to safe, suitable accommodation while creating a temporary accommodation system that is sustainable for the future. The recommendations are that Oversight and Scrutiny Committee review the temporary accommodation procurement and placement strategy and makes any recommendations to Cabinet as it feels necessary.
Thank you. Right, you've all had a chance to read this report. Does anybody have any questions, please? I'm sure you must have. Councillor Gooch.
Good evening, good evening, Chair. Good evening, all. Thank you, panel. Yes, just one comment and then one question. I have further questions, but I'm happy to go back to others in a moment. The observation really is in respect of digesting the information in the report, because it's detailed, it's long. For the benefit of anybody watching online, it's 143 pages worth of document that we have here, and it's really about the sort of presentation of it. We get to page 124 of 143 pages, and then we meet the glossary. Now, I know the glossary is in the last document that we look at, but actually when there is a technical report like this, just for future information, if we could have the glossary right at the very beginning, that would be really helpful. But as I said, I landed on there eventually, but I had to look up some of these differences beforehand. So I know it's in the final document, the proposed amendments to the new document, but it's right at the end of that new document. And because that document is right at the end of the report, we don't reach the glossary until 124, so which isn't great. A question, not related to that necessarily, but a common theme throughout this is an improvement in terms of early intervention to try to identify people that might be at risk of homelessness. So I just wondered if we could have a bit more detail about what shape that would take, because often people don't arrive on our door until it's more or less a state of desperation. So how do we do that? More public communication, or yeah? So that's the first question. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibbs. So we do try and focus on prevention as much as possible already, but we're looking at additional sort of opportunities. So looking at how we can use data, how we can use intelligence to try and target some individuals. For example, we can use the local income lift, I can't remember what the acronym is, the lift of a particular data set we can use, which can start to identify if people are starting to get into financial difficulty. There's things that we can use to then try and target people. I think there's something about how we raise awareness as well, that we are here to help. And actually, the sooner people come to us, the easier it is to try and prevent homelessness with the more time that we have. There's also the work that we can do to try and increase our access to the private rented sector. So reviewing our East Suffolk letting scheme, looking at what additional incentives can be offered. I think we're very mindful as well with the Renters' Rights Act changes. We are seeing a difference in how the private market is going to start operating going forward. And I think it's using some of that, intelligence to try and help us on that approach. But I think a key thing for me is actually how do we raise awareness of what we do? How do we get people to understand that actually they can come to us? We shouldn't be the last resort. That actually we've got some really, highly skilled, highly trained officers that can do an awful lot to help and support people. And the sooner they come to us, the better.
Okay, Councillor Jackson.
Just add on that.
Sorry.
Just answer the glossary thing. That's a valid point there. I'm just wondering if it's in electronic format, whether we can highlight those things so you could actually click on it and get an explanation, especially acronyms. That might help. So perhaps it's something we can look at. And lastly, about the early intervention and prevention, one of the things is the hidden homeless. That getting people to come to us when they are sofa surfing and that sort of thing. So I think we need to do a bit of outreach on that somehow.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Gooch said it's a huge document to try and read it and understand it. So to make sure I haven't made any wrong assumptions or I've missed bits, it would probably be nice, perhaps if Councillor Bevan, you gave the overview, you gave the introduction, perhaps a bit of personal flavour of what some of the key points of the document to perhaps brought to our attention in case we missed it, might have just helped because it's so much to take in. But I'm on page 74 and it's to do with the figures and the East Suffolk subsidy loss and then the subsidy loss East Suffolk 25-26. Could somebody put that into some context as to how do we get that money back? I mean, I do like the fact that the document says there's more evidence-based, there's more planning, which I think it reassures us all. But I'd like to perhaps verbally be explained how that financial loss and how we're going to cope with that type of thing, please. Thank you.
Yeah, Heather's got the details on it, but basically we only get the housing benefit on 2011 rates on it, and we don't, so we lose money on it over £1 million a year. It's costing us. So, and then we'll explain the details.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it is a real challenge. So the current government policy is that it's charged based on the 2011 rates, which, as I'm sure everyone will appreciate, is significantly lower than what today's current charges are. Housing benefit only pays a very small proportion. So the subsidy loss is basically the difference between what we can claim in housing benefit and what we are paying the provider. What this strategy is aiming to do is strengthen our approach to temporary accommodation, both procurement, supply, but also then reduce our reliance on nightly let, because the more money that we can invest in good quality temporary accommodation that we either own or lease, the less reliance we will have on nightly let. Nightly let is incredibly expensive. I think there's probably not a single local authority in the country right now that is not relying on it. And to a point, it's not regulated in the sense that they can charge what they want because they know there is a demand and that local authorities will use it. So the more that we can do in relation to this strategy to develop our own solutions and move away from nightly let, that will significantly reduce the subsidy loss, because at the moment it is having an impact on the general fund, as you would expect. And we're doing all that we can to mitigate it. But at the same time, until we can increase our pipeline of temporary accommodation, we are heavily reliant on it at the moment. Does that answer your question?
I'll just add to Heather, presumably the housing benefit is related to the local housing allowance, which itself is out of date. So if local housing allowance was updated, then we'd be getting even more, wouldn't we?
Councillor Lynch.
Thank you very much. Take your attention to page 22, where you're doing the run by postcode. I find it a little bit confusing because I come from Kesgrave, which is IP5. We've got a population just under 20,000. We're not on the list there at all. I know Councillor McCullum and myself have had to deal with quite a lot of cases. Are we in that? We've got two postcodes where we've got naught. Where do like IP5 come in that list?
So this, because we can't cover every single postcode, because I'm sure you appreciate with such a large geography, we wouldn't be able to fit it all on the page. So the last bit, 12%, is all other areas. So IP5 would come into that area. So where we've picked the first 10, they're the areas where we've got the most people coming from. The 8% is people that have no fixed abode, and that 12% are much smaller numbers, but over a much larger geography. So IP5 will fit within that all other areas bit.
Is this just statutory homeless, the figures? So
Why choose two areas for that? Other areas.
Councillor Nimney.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive report. I'm similar sort of area, page 22, 23. I'm looking at my area, IP 11 and 12, and I note that we sadly have no temporary accommodation existing in those areas. I know that there was an effort to acquire a property, which I think has sadly failed. Are we actually trying to make and find areas in that it's 12% of the demand, which is a considerable number of people that are actually having to be accommodated out of that area, which is a great impact on education, employment, and all those sort of things. And basically, are you able to borrow perhaps to actually build? Because I see later on within your strategy, future strategy, you are looking to try to actually build property for accommodation or have property built and have long-term leases. That sort of forward thinking that you're looking to do. Thank you.
yeah, I'll go to Heather in a minute, but the money's not a problem, because if you look at the business case, there's a payback within 10 years, because if we don't have that subsidy loss, and that's the business case we put for the Trimley house that we were looking at. So the officer told me what we're going to buy and how soon.
So we are actively looking for suitable temporary accommodation provision. We are in advanced negotiations to lease a property in the IP11 area, which will provide 12 units of accommodation for temporary accommodation. Can't disclose the address publicly at the moment because we are in advanced negotiations, but I'm hoping that will be finalised within the next few weeks. As Councillor Bevan mentioned, we do want, business cases do balance. It does show a significant investment can make significant savings to the general fund based on subsidy loss. There was some money agreed within the capital budget this year within the general fund for homeless temporary accommodation. And so we can utilise that if we need to, as and when opportunities arise. But we are continually actively looking for suitable property, and this strategy will help us look at our approach and consider some more options than maybe we've considered previously.
So basically, that 12% of the population are in temporary accommodation are actually being accommodated outside of their home grounds, so they are away possibly from education, employment, and all those things which are really damaging to families and the community generally.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of my major concerns, especially in the rural area. And if you look at Leiston as well, because we didn't retain any stock there, we haven't got the option of using our own stock, which we have in the north. And we have good relations with the providers and Flagship, but they're not the same as us. So it's a problem. And especially children being taken out of the area, they lose their education, you lose your support network. And that's one of the things that this strategy is really hoping to address, to try and mitigate the damage that's caused when people are homeless.
Thank you. Councillor Corley?
Thank you, Chair. Hope you don't mind, I've probably done a little bit of a leapfrog and I'm on the appendix and looking at the delivery plan, which for me is the living document. There's no page number on it. It's just appendix D, temporary accommodation delivery plan. Just two things really. One, which Heather has already given a great answer to, one of them is actually the outcome and how you get to that outcome. As an example, you know, identifying early people, looking at the uplift, the benefits, perfect. I just wanted to ask about two things, with you mentioning how the increase in demand is growing and a bigger strain on the budget. There's two bits really. One is the people who are not in the region or in another country, how is that affecting the budget? Is it cheaper to do that, or is it more to do that on one of these? And the other one was domestic violence. How do you see, because it doesn't actually stipulate on how you would help those by keeping them in the house? Are they still going to be in the house with the offender? You know, is that going to cost a lot more money, having to have specially trained people who need to be in there, whether it's counselling, anger management, you name it? So just on those two things, I've only sort of dug a little bit deeper and looked at those two for now, because there is a lot in there. It's a well laid out document, but for me the outcomes is how do you actually achieve those outcomes? Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Sorry, can I just clarify your first question? Is this people that are currently placed out of the area, that we're having to place them out of area? Yeah, so this is predominantly the nightly let accommodation, so it is incredibly expensive. So this is why we want to try and encourage and ensure we can invest more in properties within East Suffolk, so we can keep people closer to their, family, education, employment, support networks, and that ultimately the investment is going in property that we're ultimately, receiving a return on, rather than just paying for somebody to be placed out of area. The team work incredibly hard and diligently to continually, on a daily basis, be reviewing where people are placed and to try and move people back into the area as quickly as they can. And it's always done based on looking at priority, looking at vulnerabilities, and on a case-by-case basis. And in relation to the second question around domestic violence, there's kind of a number of different aspects to that. So historically, it always used to be if there was a victim of domestic violence, they had to leave their home, they had to leave everything behind, they had to start again. And actually, and rightly so, that the kind of emphasis has changed, because actually, why should the victim then lose everything around them? And so now there's stronger sort of laws and stronger sort of tools in our armoury, as it were, that means we can keep people in their homes and we can support them with excluding the perpetrator. So there can be safety measures, what we call target hardening, to put into their homes to try and keep them safe. We're also working with the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance, known as DAHA, and we're on about 18-month, 2-year kind of development programme, where we will hopefully ultimately achieve our what's called DAHA accreditation. So we'll be recognised as being an organisation that does a lot to support victims of domestic violence. We did have a new domestic abuse policy adopted towards the end of last year, which sets out a number of things across all of the aspects of housing and what we'll do to try and address that. But each case is on a case-by-case basis. We work very closely with people like the police and the independent domestic violence advisors, because sometimes it is safe for people to remain in their homes. It can be, there might be bail conditions or something, sort of court orders in place that can protect them. But there will be occasions where it might be safer for them to move, even if it's just temporarily, until we can get them safe and back in the home, surrounded by their support networks. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. That's really good. Chair, can I just follow up with a comment? Yeah. On housing, because there's a lot of UK companies that make really good modular housing. You know, I mean, I've got one of, £40,000, which is a 2-bedroom, but I've seen some ones at £60,000, huge properties, all fully fitted with everything you can imagine. I mean, surely, being a 2-bedroom property like that, £60,000, all you need is the land area, whether it's an old airport or runway, something like that. You could quite easily accommodate a lot of people. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Booth.
I just,
Yes, sorry.
that's really important. topic then. It is part of our strategy is to look at these modular homes, and you're quite right. But it's not quite as simple as that because you're doing the services there for the sewage and that sort of thing. So we are actively looking at sites and looking at prisoners building homes on that.
Sorry, Councillor Gooch, does it relate to what we're talking about?
Yes, I've got the page up. I was doing research on this anyway. I'd already done research on this before before the beginning of the meeting here. And yeah, the doc, if you check online, there's the document by Campbell Tickle, actually with various case studies in terms of addressing temporary accommodation and various specific case studies on modular solutions. So there's the Waits project in Cardiff, Wales, and to comment on your observations as well. There some extensive lists of projects that have taken place both in city locations, London, Cardiff, etc., but also semi-rural, more in keeping with the kind of complexities that we have with market towns and a couple of big towns in the area. So Dorset is one, there's Devon. It says the research from the Centre for Homelessness Impact indicates that up to 70% of these modular schemes are built on council-owned land. One of the case studies gives one where a little group of 6 one-bedroom properties were built on church-owned land. So again, a sympathetic canon or diocese bishop might be the person to talk to there, and the cost is, as you suggested, the average cost is somewhere between 35 to 75,000 per one-bedroom unit. So in the report it keeps saying we're looking at this, and we've talked about modular housing before when we were here this time last year. So where are we? What have we actually done on this, and which case studies have we looked at, and what have we learned from them? Thanks.
Right, was it about 8 weeks ago, went down to Ipswich with our development team, look at the modular units, the Russell-Sleeper units in Ipswich, really impressed with them. We are looking at St Peter's Court. When that comes down, we've got some area there, we can have a meanwhile place there to get some in there. And it's a good question. In fact, I think I mentioned it when we talked yesterday at our briefing. I said, what is happening? So things have to be moved on this because it's a good solution. So I totally agree.
If I may as well, many of the observations in respect of these case studies are that they are highly energy efficient as well. So it's a multi-gain, isn't it? Financially, socially, aesthetically and environmentally. Thanks.
In fact, 3 years ago, we looked at Vietti Passive. They had those units there. Unfortunately, they went bust, but that's the sort of thing they can be very good. Yeah.
Could I ask the officers and you as well, Councillor Bevan, to speak well into your microphone because we're having trouble up here hearing you speak. So I'd be grateful if you could do that. Okay, so Councillor Jepson.
Thank you. It was absolute almost music to my ears. If you can have music to your ears when you're reading something, I'm not sure. But to see a really comprehensive risk assessment of some of the points. So that's on, for those of you who haven't, it's on page 29. Because sometimes these documents don't have what I think is adequate recognition of risks. So it's really pleasing to see. My only question is then, how often will you review that risk table to ensure either some aren't going up or down, and will it be done periodically? What's the score on that? But well done, thank you. Ella.
Thank you. So we are developing a sort of strategic homelessness board that will be sort of chaired by myself, where we will review both this strategy, but also the homelessness and Russell-Sleeper strategy, which Scrutiny kindly scrutinised last year ahead of it being approved at Cabinet. And we will track things like the risks, the actions, and also the achievements as well. It will also bear in mind as things change. So none of you will be surprised that legislation and guidance and initiatives and funding opportunities change all the time. So that group will have oversight of all of that to make sure that everything that we're dealing with tonight remains current, relevant, and that we're not missing anything.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for my late arrival. I did send a note through about the train arrival. Thank you. So I don't want to be too parochial about it, but to me, looking at the graph on page 10 of the strategy, the crisis here looks predominantly to be in IP postcodes. If you take those out, the NR postcodes appear to have supply over demand overwhelmingly. And in particular IP11, but not exclusively IP11. And we know why, historically, why that is. So there's no blame there or anything. But what I'm missing from what I've read is a sense of focus on these really glaring deficit area of our district. And I can't see any real differentiation in terms of where the focus is going to be geographically, because anyone looking at this will just think, well, I mean, you're just mentioning Councillor Bevan, St Peter's Court. Now that's in Lowestoft, right? So again, I just feel, and we've had a recent case in Felixstowe of homelessness coming into our area and not being able to accommodate it at all, and we just have no supply. And I really appreciate that you are really working to improve the situation. What I'm missing, and I'd like you to, respond to perhaps, is there a case for having a very specific or a certain focus within this strategy on the south of the district and in particular the IP11 postcode, also some of the other IPs. For example, in the modular sites and stuff, it doesn't mention that, particularly they could be focused in the south. Yeah, so that's the gist of what I'd like to ask you.
Okay, yeah, we're well aware. Can you hear? Yeah, we're well aware of that, and so that is why we really did our best to get that Trimley place there, and we're also getting another 12 spaces down there. But modular homes, we're certainly not excluding the south of the area. It's part, so if you've got a spot where we could put some modular homes, just let us know, and we'll have a look at it. Yeah. You want to add?
You're not excluding the south of the district. Well, that's good to hear, Councillor Bevan. I mean, that's not how I would have wanted the response to be, really. But what I was going to say on the constructive side is let's work with the ward members from those areas closely and specifically. Of course you're not, and I completely get that you are fully aware of it. I completely get that. I just don't see in the strategy a full recognition of the glaring imbalance that largely you've inherited. It's not to do with the work of this administration, but I don't see in it quite the attempt to rebalance specifically in these very high glaring deficit geographical areas. And yes, I'm sure the ward members would love to work with you to help address that.
Well, you may have got the wrong impression, but certainly that is not the case. We're very much concerned about the south as well as the north. In fact, I think 2 years ago, I wrote to every ward member and said, have you got any land that we could put accommodation on, new housing, temporary accommodation? So I have asked ward members right across the district to suggest some ideas. So we need your help as well, because something like putting pods there, some people will object to that. So we need to have the right place for them. A lot of people will say, oh, it's just going to be a drug den. So there's certain risks involved in it. So let us know. Let's work on it. Yeah. The proof will be in the pudding.
Thank you. Councillor Plummer.
Yes, I think this might be getting down to more specifics than maybe you want to. But in there's a long document from Campbell Tickle about I can't remember what the title of it was, but the sort of what should be in place in a temporary accommodation. It's a long document, and I'm just slightly concerned that they're talking about in there. It talks about gas central heating to be preferred, means for heating, blah, 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 with a sort of suggestion that anything electric might not be the right way to go. Whereas we do know that there are modern on forward going electrical, I'm not saying that everything should be that, but it seems odd to have something saying we should stick with what's been around for donkey's years rather than having an option to move forward. I know that's not our document. It's come from an organisation we're working with. It's on the specific bit is on page 45, but I don't think that you need to read the specific bit. It's just more a comment really than a question. But if you've got anything you wanted to say on it.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that gas is actually cheaper to heat a house than electric because of the way the pricing is done, which we don't have any control over, and that's the central government needs to sort that out. It's very difficult for us to, put people in temporary accommodation who are obviously feel poor, and then ask them to pay extra for their heating. Heather, do you want to answer?
Yeah, I think so. This is about the standards, and this is very much about what we expect a provider to deliver and what we will assess them against to make sure it meets the standards. So it does sound 6.2 where properties are electrically heated, a high standard of insulation will be required because from experience, putting electric heating without the right insulation doesn't give you adequate heating. When it goes on to talk about heating systems being fully serviced and things, this is about making sure they meet all of the gas requirements. There's a number of, so we're not saying that that's the preference. There's just a lot more regulations around gas heating than there is electrical heating. So for us, this is, and it does go on the following page to talk about different heating, such as economy 7 and solid fuel heating systems. I think what I would say is that this is almost like a checklist for us as officers, so that we can make sure if we're placing somebody into accommodation, it has all the right sort of checks and balances. And as I say, there is a lot more regulation around gas than there is electric, so that's why it goes into more detail. But it's not that it's a preference, but we do know from experience that a lot of the private providers we use are still using gas central heating at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Gooch.
Sorry, I've got lots of pages open here. I'm just looking at all of these wonderful designs for modular homes. They're just aesthetically really beautiful, actually. There's just such a wide variety here. Anyway, my question is in relation to the unitary. So there is mention made here again, this one is page 96. Again, it's intended that this strategy will establish a firm foundation in the important lead up to the unitary. And as is public knowledge now, East Suffolk is largely kept intact, apart from the extreme southern end that will go to Ipswich and southern Suffolk. We'll join with central or Stowmarket area, as we know, we being those of us in the north, Lowestoft, for example. So how much coordination is going on now? Because it seems that we really need to be sort of synthesizing these teams, and actually we've done audits, we know what our social housing stock is, we know what our temporary housing stock is, but there needs to be a blend, obviously, doesn't there, with theirs too. Thank you.
Without getting into too much of the process, I'll give you a bit of an overview of how we're developing that. And I think it was touched on at the last overview in scrutiny, in that all of the authorities are coming together as led by Mark Ash, the the head of paid service at the County Council as SRO. Within that group, an implementation board has been set up and work streams have been developed, and that covers all of the services of all of the councils. Each of those work streams has a lead, so they're all chief executives, and Arthur Travonia is the lead for housing, which covers all elements of housing as far as I understand it, and Heather might be better placed to answer some of the detail around what's being included. Within that, there are work streams, and that will cover all of the housing elements: temporary accommodation, homelessness, HRAs, aggregation, disaggregation. And there are phases of development of the unitary authorities. And the first phase is discovery, where all documents are put on the table effectively from all of the councils, so nothing is missed off. We're coming to the conclusion of that this summer, and we start design in the autumn, and design will be where that kind of question comes about, which is, okay, so what are we doing differently in the current East Suffolk versus what's happening in the current Baber and Mid, and how do we make sure that when we design the new unitary authority that nothing gets missed off and it's pertinent and appropriate for that place. The complication, of course, is when you start disaggregating HRAs, which Heather is far better placed to comment on, but hopefully that gives you a bit of an understanding that nothing will get missed off, and actually the place will be designed in such a way that's appropriate for the needs of the residents.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, so Fern's been heavily involved as part of the discovery phase. So her equivalent at the West is leading that particular work stream. But as part of that, we've been mapping, for example, where all the temporary accommodation is based on the new geographical boundaries. So we know exactly what will sit within the East and Central. It does take in Stowmarket and some of the surrounding areas. There's quite a significant number of temporary accommodation units in that area. So they would potentially come into the East and Central area. The way that homelessness works, because it's very collaborative and there's so much kind of joined up working, we actually already have really, really good relationships with our peers at Labour, Mid Suffolk, West and Ipswich. And so coming together to do the discovery phase, they meet on a regular basis anyway, and actually do generally have a good understanding of how each other is working. But yeah, I think one of the things we've been able to do is this mapping exercise. We know exactly what would sit within the East and Central, and we know exactly what will sit within the Ipswich and South, because obviously sort of IP11 area will, you know, be part of that Ipswich and South in the future.
Councillor Lynch.
Thank you. Is it possible to give us a better understanding of what you're looking for in property? The reason I ask that is when you look at, when we come towards the south, the IP11, the IP5, the southern half of IP12, over the last 2.5 years, we have had hundreds of thousands of houses built. The building has been massive. Yeah. We have sites that have shut down because they can't find people to buy the houses all over the place, whether you're looking on the outskirts of Felixstowe, on the outskirts of Woodbridge, the outskirts of, and this council has just put a call for land, and nearly any green space in that area has been now put forward by the same farmers. So what is it you're looking for? Because those houses have been built in those areas, and I don't understand why the houses have been built in large numbers, and yet Councillor Bennett said, saying we're not, over the last 2 to 3 years, been involved or bought or done anything with any of them. What is it you're looking for that they're not delivering?
Basically, what we need is houses that people can afford to live in. Yeah. We've still got, I think it's 200 odd people who are in high need of accommodation in the Felixstowe area. And there's homelessness there because they can't afford the houses. And it's a broken housing market, I'm afraid. That is where the housing crisis comes from. Because on the current wages, local people cannot afford to buy the houses, ever want them. Mm-hmm.
So we are doing what we can to actively acquire additional properties. Councillor Bevan was very passionate last year about us not allowing some properties in Trimley to not be sold and brought forward as affordable housing. Some of them are now ready. We're about to do handover tomorrow, I think. And so that's, you know, really exciting. I also sign off all the Section 106 agreements with developers. So I make sure that the affordable housing is being delivered at a number of these sites. What we've also seen with some sites, for example, Brightwell Lakes in Martlesham, we initially had some difficulty finding registered providers willing to take those on. After much work and negotiation, we found them. But then in addition to that, we found RPs coming forward, willing to buy the open market sale properties and convert them to affordable. So again, signed a variation agreement to actually increase the number of affordable homes being delivered on that site. So where we actually originally thought we were going to have a lower number, we've now increased that. From a temporary accommodation perspective, we don't necessarily look to buy particular street purchases unless there is a specific need. What we tend to look for is where we can have a number of properties in one location, so it's easier for us to manage. So for example, we've just started on site at Avenue Mansions in Lowestoft, which is going to deliver 12 self-contained 15 self-contained units of temporary accommodation, which will be up and running towards the summer next year. It helps us when we're managing at any one time well over 100 households in temporary accommodation to try and have as many as possible booked into similar localities. If we have everybody spread out, it's much more difficult for us to manage effectively.
I'll just add that one of those homes that we saved last year is on Home Choice this week, so is there available for local people already?
But again, you're mentioning the temporary accommodation in the north. We've got huge amounts being built in the south, and you say you want them in batches. Why couldn't you have looked at some of the developments that are coming off Felixstowe or Martlesham, or for a batch and talk to the builders? Or is it something that the builders? I don't get why over the last spell, where so much house has been built, there is no temporary accommodation in the south, and yet they're building at the moment. It's not a lack of building.
So are you talking about specifically temporary accommodation, or are you talking about general needs, affordable housing?
Up here seems to be temporary, that we desperately need something in the south, and we don't seem to have been doing anything for temporary in the south. Or am I missing something?
So we tried to acquire a property last year, which we were unable to secure. We have looked at some other properties since, and for a number of reasons, they haven't been suitable. We have to make sure it stacks up financially. We have to make sure the property is going to be suitable, potentially if it needs conversion work, so it's cost effective for us to do so. We have been in some quite protracted negotiations around the properties I mentioned that we're going to be hopefully leasing. The 12 units that are in the IP11 area, they are in the kind of Felixstowe area. We had hoped to have them by now, but the negotiations have taken longer than we would have hoped. We are now in the very final stages, and we have no reason now to believe that won't happen. We are very close to signing that, and then we've just got to get some improvement works done, but we should have them hopefully available in October, November time. So that will deliver an additional 12 units in the south, which is a significantly higher number than we have currently. My point in relation to us talking about sort of Trimley and Brightwell lakes is that, whilst temporary accommodation is one solution, actually increasing the overall housing supply is another part of the solution. And actually within our own development pipeline within East Suffolk, we have more homes being delivered in the south than we do in the north at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, general needs is, what we want really, and using our own stock for temporary accommodation is actually good value for us. So if we need there is a problem with margins, and developers are coming back to us and saying we can't do the third affordable, which is in the local plan for the Felixstowe area. And North Felixstowe Garden neighbourhood, we're having an argument to try and maintain the amount of affordable in there. The pressure, the margins are tight, and the pressure is on. You can see it right across Norfolk and Suffolk, right across the country, that developers are saying we can't afford to do the affordable. We're going to drop the affordable. They still managed to pay the landowner a lot of money there.
Councillor Nimney.
Thank you, Chair. It was by way of a bit of a response to Councillor Gooch. Pre-COVID, I went to the UK Constructors Exhibition at the NEC, and there were a number of companies who were modern methods of construction. A number of big schemes were running. The Government Minister for Housing was there. It was all systems go. COVID happened. Many of them have collapsed. I've been back since, and all you're now getting is a bit of, but there aren't many folks who were in the position that they were pre-COVID. So I think that's going to take the time before that comes back up again. The question I wanted to put was, I noticed on page 83, item B, you're exploring the opportunity to actually enter into 10-year leases with, I take that sort of landlords. Are you looking at banks or insurance companies, or it's something that should have been done years ago? I'm just wondering where is there an open market for that to be happening, because it looks from the figures you were saying it should already be happening. Thank you.
So we already do some private sector leasing at the moment. So these are leased properties through a private landlord. So it's a private landlord that's willing to commit to a long-term lease with us. So in this case, we're looking at 10-year leases. This is on the basis that we've had some new information, some new guidance around potentially being able to claim a higher level of subsidy through housing benefit if the lease is over 10 years. So we are literally still today in discussions with the Anglia Revenues Partnership, looking at making sure we follow all the correct criteria so that we can maximise the income that we are able to generate to make sure it is a cost-effective solution. The benefit of that is we can look at all postcodes within East Suffolk because we're looking at individual dwellings and landlords that are willing to come forward. I think with the Renters' Rights Act changes, that potentially makes this a more palatable option for some landlords because they're guaranteed their rental income because we will be paying it as the lease holder. We'll be doing that, for 10 years, so they know exactly what income they're going to be getting. We support with things like the repairs and maintenance, the changeover of tenancies and things. So it almost takes all the pain away from a landlord. So we're optimistic that once we've negotiated that with the Anglia Revenues Partnership, that's going to be a really good solution to increase our supply, particularly for some of the sort of maybe larger properties, like the 3-bedroom properties where we've got families that are harder to place in temporary accommodation.
And the big advantage of this is we don't have to go with our begging bowl to finance the capital investment.
Which in itself would be wonderful, but equally you could be addressing the significant shortage we have in the south, because as we all know, sadly, our housing was given away. In fact, one of the first so to do way back in the good old bad old days. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just curious on the proposed purchase in the Felixstowe area. What's the strategy if that doesn't come off? And assuming it does, because you do sound hopeful, Heather, that's good. To what extent does that solve or resolve the scale of the issue in the area, or will there still be a significant ongoing need?
So we're not actually purchasing, we're looking at leasing the property through a provider. We are now at the stage where we're almost ready to sign the heads of terms. We're just finalising how the repairs and maintenance will be carried out. We don't want to use our own in-house DLA because of the travel distance between sort of Lowestoft and Felixstowe, just for minor repairs. We're looking at a contractor delivering day-to-day repairs and maintenance. That will go quite a significant way to helping with the demand. Whilst we know a lot of our temporary accommodation is kind of Lowestoft centric up in the north, that is by and large where the majority of our demand is coming from. That northern part, we do have a demand in the Felixstowe area, but it's nowhere near as high. And those 12 units will make a real difference to reducing how many people we have to place out of the area and how many we can keep more closely located to their support networks.
That's really good to hear. Is there a possibility, I don't know how these things work, but there could actually be a pull factor? So I'm actually kind of somewhat aware of a case in Felixstowe at the moment where it's quite an attractive place potentially to kind of relocate to, or I'm using those terms advisedly. I know that's not quite the right way to put it, but that I think that is that a thing that can happen, that you provide decent accommodation in that sort of location, and actually people can move to the area or choose to do that.
So you're saying people are going to be homeless. If they're going to be homeless, they'll be homeless in Felixstowe, so they can stay there and they can get temporary accommodation in Felixstowe. Is that the sort of the angle? I couldn't quite get the drift of it.
Somewhat, yes. I mean, there's actually a case that I know of in a person in Felixstowe at the moment where that sort of dynamic may be at play. I can't, I don't want to say too much, but I mean, I just wanted to ask you: does that sort of thing happen? And does that affect, the people are going to where the demand is? I guess word gets out, and that impact on the strategy.
So, having been in homelessness for many years, that would at one point have been the case. You would have seen that people would almost engineer becoming homeless as a quicker way to get a council house, but the reality is that doesn't really happen anymore. The Homeless Reduction Act has much sort of stronger kind of assessment criteria around what we look for. And actually, if people are trying to almost engineer their homelessness to try and get a quick route into social housing, that can't happen anymore. So the team will do a, excuse me, like a thorough assessment before they will make any determination of whether someone's owed an initial duty or a longer term duty. So in answer to your question, no, I don't think that would be an issue once we have accommodation in the area.
Just clarification on that. I think when we assess someone as homeless, they have to come from East Suffolk for us to be statutory responsible for them,
Unless they're feeling it.
unless there's domestic violence. So, does that, people can't come on a boat, shall we say, and go straight in there. But
I can't say too much about specific, but there is a particular case in Phoenix at the moment, which is an interesting one, but it's just one. So
Yeah, can I just come in and just say that, with any strategy, the purpose will be to monitor the impact of this. This is one of the stronger strategies that has a really kind of profound evidence base in terms of that demand and need. So I wouldn't want to be too hung up on some of the locations, but nevertheless, the officers will be really clear in what is happening in the terms of provision as a result of that demand. So if there was any, for example, skewing of that data based on the anecdotal evidence that you've shared, the officers would see that over the course of time. You might find that there would be a spike, for example, and you'd question why that was. Heather's mentioned that there'll be a board reviewing the risks. That was a question earlier, and there'd be, an opportunity to understand actions and progress. So if there were any anomalies, that would be identified at that point. But I think Heather's probably answered the specific question, but hopefully that gives you a little further assurance that we would keep monitoring the progress of this.
Councillor Corley.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, because it triggered a thought about with renting properties and having landlords given to you with all the sort of regulations that have come in now, it's been quite difficult for a lot of them. But before, a lot of them who have a decent property would never dream of giving it to a council because of being struck. Do you still find that's the case?
yeah, I think we've had some resistance on our private letting, and Heather can sort of get on that, but we're very strictly controlled, and we look after the property ourselves. So Heather can fill in the details on that.
Thank you. I think there's a difference, because if we're trying to get somebody to support through our East Suffolk letting scheme, where we're wanting them to rent it out privately to the tenant on a monthly basis, generally that's at local housing allowance, potentially plus 10%. And that's often significantly lower than market rates. With the leasing scheme, we can charge it slightly differently. And I think it takes away all the pain and all the problems, in the sense that they know they've signed up for 10 years with us. They know we'll do the repairs and maintenance, and we're making an agreement that at the end of the tenancy, the property will be returned in a reasonable condition compared to what it is when we take it on. So, apart from sort of standard wear and tear, for example, but we would, make sure the property is in a good condition when it's handed back. So I think it takes away some of that concern, maybe some of that resistance. And it's a more attractive offer on the basis they know exactly what they're going to get, and it's guaranteed for 10 years with increases and things.
Okay.
Additionally, if people are paying double council tax for their second home, if they let it for 70 days or more, if they let us have it for 6 months, stay the winter, then they wouldn't have to pay the double council tax.
Thank you. Councillor Mooney.
Page 89, improving flow and reducing length of stay. Has the length of stay expanded over the last year or so? And is it actually more difficult to move those in temporary accommodation into settled accommodation, particularly in the areas that they would wish to be settled back into? And do we have any sort of figures of, how many, etc., or is that buried in detail elsewhere?
So I haven't got the full breakdown line by line. I'm happy to provide something outside the meeting to give you more information. Generally speaking, it's about 100 days on average that somebody will be in temporary accommodation before being accommodated in longer term housing. We continue to try and have a good throughput. The problem is the more that people in effect kind of bed block, the longer they're in temporary accommodation, the less quickly properties are becoming available for the next group of people that need temporary accommodation. So we're consistently and continuously looking at not only things like through the housing register, but actually how can we discharge into other solutions as well? So that might be into the private rented sector. It could be, if it's a single person, potentially into our East Suffolk Housing Pathway that we developed last year. So we're always looking at more options and not just having, you know, the housing register as the only solution really. But if you want more information, we're happy to provide it outside of the meeting.
It was just, has the length of stay in temporary actually expanded over the last several years?
I haven't got the numbers in front of me. What I would say is, in general, the number of people in temporary accommodation has increased significantly over the last 3 years, a few years, particularly since COVID. We saw a massive spike during COVID, and we've never really gone down from that. We've just kind of continued. And that's, again, it's not an East Suffolk thing. This is across the country. I mean, we're at record levels, and that's not a good record to have. But across the country, then we're at record levels of homelessness. I feel that we've done well. We don't have people sitting in temporary accommodation for years. There's local authorities that do, and it is a difficult balance. Jen, do you want to come in? Sorry.
Thank you. I was just going to add that the local housing allowance level rates across the district have had an influence as well in how affordable accommodation can be. And so what we're finding is that we are doing affordability assessments for those families that are in temporary accommodation, and some of those can only afford social housing, and therefore private rented accommodation, particularly in the south of the district, with a rental market increasing as a result of a number of issues such as Sizewell or other pressures within the district, it's meant that that's had a significant impact about the options available for applicants in temporary accommodation to move on, and particularly for those families that need larger properties. So if you were to look at a private rented accommodation property in the south of the district for a 3 or 4 bedroom, you're looking at over £1,200 to £1,500 a month potentially. So if anyone is claiming benefits and relying on benefits because they're not working, then affordability certainly becomes an issue. So it is difficult to move people on as a result, and there are quite a lot of households in temporary accommodation where the council owes them a main duty, which means that we have a duty to accommodate them following the homelessness application and the decision that we've reached, but we're finding it very difficult to move them on. So affordability, rental, private rented sector, accommodation being unachievable for some of those families is a big problem.
So has Sizewell C actually impacted the rental market, certainly in the Leiston area, and what has Sizewell done to help those folks who may be in that position?
It has in some ways. Oh, sorry, can you hear me okay? So the rental market in the south of the district has increased. There is the accommodation or the housing fund that is available for us to utilise to mitigate the impact of Sizewell, and so we can utilise some of the funds to support rent in advance or deposits through our East Suffolk lettings model to allow families to seek accommodation in the private rented sector. But nevertheless, the cost of private rented has increased, not so much in the north, although the rental market has increased across the district and across the country, I think, but in East Suffolk we have seen a significant increase. And I think the choice that private landlords have nowadays, you know, they have a list of people that approach them for accommodation, and unfortunately there is so many families, and they will choose potentially the family that, you know, shows that they can afford the accommodation. So to answer your question, yes, there has been an impact on certain areas of the county, particularly the district, particularly, but there are funds there to mitigate that impact. Is whether we have enough suitable accommodation.
Thank you very much.
Just wanted to add, we did do a members briefing. There's a lot of work we're doing in relation to Sizewell and accommodation. It was recorded. I'm not sure where they're saved, but I'm sure Sarah will be able to share it. But yeah, I mean, we've got a team of people working solely on how we mitigate against the impact of accommodation and Sizewell related items. So if members are interested, it would be well worth having a watch, because if not, I could talk for hours about it.
Okay. I think we've all had a fair share at asking questions. I have one question I'd like to ask. And I prefaced what I'm going to say was I think the need for more temporary accommodation in Felixstowe it's an absolute dire need. On page 23, it says in Felixstowe IP11 there is a more pronounced imbalance with around 12% of demand, but only a very small number of local TA units. How many units do we actually have? Because I was under the impression there weren't any.
So we have some in Felixstowe and Woodbridge. They're owned by a registered provider, they're not owned by us, but we have what we call full nomination rights to them. So we can use them for temporary accommodation. We've got 7 units between Woodbridge and Felixstowe. So we do have them available at the moment. And then hopefully, like I say, all being well, we've got another 12 units coming on board in the next few weeks.
Yeah, okay, because I mean, I'm sure we'll all have similar cases, but not in the far distant past. I had one particular case, single parent, 2 young children, both children with special education needs. They were moved up to the north of the district where obviously the mother couldn't get to work and the children were taken away not only from the support of the larger family, but also from their school, which was very, very important. And it was really a dire situation and one that I hope I never have to deal with again. So please, please, please provide us with more temporary accommodation. I know you are from what you've said.
Yeah, I think what I'd just add to that is so the registered provider we're working with at the moment, we are continually having conversations about looking at what else they can do to help us. So if they've got a property, for example, they're not sure they want to keep within the general needs stock, actually seeing whether that's something we can take on for temporary accommodation purposes and varying our agreement with them to increase that as and when available. There's 2 kind of main registered providers we tend to engage with who have the larger sort of proportion of stock. And we have regular communication with them to see what else that we can do to try and acquire things on a case-by-case basis.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, I think we can move on. Have we got any recommendations that we'd like to make or any debate that we need to have? First thing was the glossary of terms. I think that's very important in any future document. So can we add that one to a list? Councillor Lynch?
I think following on what you've just said, Chairman, I think that we're part of we should recommend that there is a greater effort in the south to try and sort out temporary accommodation where we have what appears to be none. I understand we're working with other parties, but as ourselves, it shows we've got none. And I think that should be a high priority of what we've seen here.
Yeah, I agree with that. Anybody, Councillor Newley?
Yeah, it was mentioned that some time ago there was a call put out to all ward councillors who may have a site within their patch that could be utilised for a prefab type construction. I think it would be well worth that going out again, particularly in the southern area, because that is very important. And if land is available, then modern methods of construction are coming about. They are available, and that may be a future, you know, actual provision of temporary housing and actually even permanent. So I think that should go out again.
Okay,
within the system.
Councillor Lynch, can I come back to you in a minute? Councillor Bennett, sorry.
Fully understand the gentleman beside me's viewpoint, but with the call for land, all the farmers around the south have put their land up, aiming at houses and £1 million plus an acre. They're not going to even consider temporary accommodation while we're doing the call for land, because the land's worth an awful lot more, and poor farmers are always interested in lining their pocket.
I think I was rather more thinking of parish councils, churches, and it needn't be a big plot of land.
Okay,
you know,
yeah, I think we've got what you mean. Yeah, Councillor Bennett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wonder whether we could do a little bit more than that, than just an email going out sort of thing, and actually get our heads together, do some site visits or something at a Teams meeting or something where we really thrash it out for the South region a little bit. Is that something that we could consider? I don't know. I think more than just, but because I think we need to know in more detail what your constraints are, what your capability, what your what your framework and yeah, get a bit more specific and a bit more kind of face to face about it. But failing that, I would agree with Councillor Lynch's recommendation about just a focus in here that just gives that recognition of it in the report.
Okay.
Can I just come back to that? I think that is a good suggestion. I suppose what I'm mindful of is the capacity constraints of the officers, and whilst I that is an excuse, but I think what we want to try and do is make sure that we are directing that capacity at the greatest possible, or for the greatest possible impact. So what I would suggest is that we take that suggestion away, align it with what we've currently got, and then work through what our kind of short, medium and long-term ambitions are for the South, so that we are clear on what we want to deliver and how we best do it. So rather than say, yes, let's crack on and do that, that's a great idea, can we take that away, look at what we've got internally and then come back to you?
I think that sounds a very sensible idea. Councillor Bevan?
In the meanwhile, I'm quite happy to come down to Felixstowe. If you've got some ideas of sites, let's go and have a look at them. Then I can have a word with Fern and she can tell us. We can just draw up a short list of possibilities that we can explore more formally.
A little used car park, maybe.
And vice versa. I mean, you may have ideas too.
Councillor Corley.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Also, just a quick suggestion that the developers and the manufacturers of the modular housing, they also have their own resources. So working with them previously is asking them about, you mentioned earlier, about the utilities, you know, the issues with that. Well, you can actually have small towns, well, small villages, let's say, that are very self-sufficient, not even on the grid. So their waste is all into power digesters, creates energy to a single engine. We've got the wind, the solar, and even the water that they do from drilling down, and it goes through filtration. So they're completely independent. My suggestion would be that, you know, maybe speaking to some of these developers and the manufacturers to sort of say to them, look, this is what our problem is. Could you come up with an idea and how would you do that and how much would it cost? And could they be self-sufficient? And they'll do that work for you to present you with a report on looking at that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Not sure if you're debate or question, but yeah, it's an interesting idea that. I mean, one of the things I'm particularly keen on, because these units should be movable. So you could actually move the TA to where it's needed. No, not every day, obviously, but you know, it can be put on a load loader. And the idea, because that is the real problem about siting, is having the sewage in there and the water supply and so on. So with PV panels and so on, you could be fairly independent. So it's an interesting idea. We discussed with Hill Residential, we looked at their modules, haven't we? So we are discussing, in prisoners building homes, we're in touch with them, aren't we? Michelle's been looking at that. So we are discussing stuff with people. But let's, you know, get back to Felixstowe, let's have a visit, have a site, see what's there, ask Fern what we can have, and then tell Heather what we're gonna have.
Thank you. Do we need any further debate on this? I think we've really done quite a lot already. Sort of ventured from questions into debate as we're going along. So I don't think that, I'm sorry, Councillor Bennett.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to, I don't know how appropriate it is, but I despite asking questions I do think that it's really positive to see very clearly in the strategy how seriously the issue is taken and how professionally it's being addressed.
Yeah.
And I think that's really positive, and I think I'd like to think we can note that formally in our
Yes, we can do.
recommendation.
Okay. Right. So, Sarah, would you like to, have you got those points?
Through you, Chair. So can I ask, essentially, you're happy to endorse the strategy as it is with the change to the glossary position within the
Yeah.
strategy, and then around that you have a number of suggestions for the future. The bit about the South and the Felixstowe, there was a suggestion earlier around having more focus in the strategy to the South. is that still something that you want to put in as a recommendation? Or are you happy that outside of the strategy, that you take that bit away and, as suggested by the strategic director and the cabinet member, have some discussions, but leave the strategy as it is?
Yes, I think so.
The focus on the south doesn't have to be just Felixstowe.
No,
It's the general south.
Yeah.
Let the flexibility there that if something's in Martlesham or if something, it's the south that's the problem down there. And I don't want it to sort of say, well, we're only going to look at Felixstowe and then something comes up at Martlesham that's perfect, or something comes up at Brightwell, or, you know, there's enough different places and we've got enough area that let's just try and get the south. If we get something in the south first, that's a plus, then we can focus if we need areas inside the south, but we're in zero at the moment.
If we were to go to page 23 and look at all the postal districts where we have significant demand, but there is no temporary accommodation, I think that guides us to where we need to be looking at. If you look at that chart that you have on page 23.
Yeah, I have looked at it long and
long,
hard.
but there are quite a number of
Yes.
IPs, etc.
Yes.
And that gives a much broader picture, and it makes it less Felixstowe dominant, which is what it should be anyway.
And I'm quite sure anybody that's looking for temporary accommodation won't mind if it's in Felixstowe, Curtin, Martlesham,
absolutely.
Kesgrave.
Yeah.
As long as it's not miles away up the A12.
Yeah, exactly that.
Okay, right, thank you. Councillor Bennett.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's not just Felixstowe, it's clearly the south. But I wonder what other members feel, whether the strategy should mention something more specific. It presents the information that there is a difference and where the glaring imbalance is, but it doesn't indicate that there's going to be any particular sort of different action taken in the south. And that maybe that's how the strategy works. You just do this good work and it will improve as a whole. But I don't know. I do think there's a possible case for having something new or something in the strategy that indicates that recognizes that specifically.
My personal view is that the strategy as it is, but take on board what we've already discussed this evening. And I'm hopeful that the officers and you, David, will go away and think about what we said very, very seriously. I'm sure you will.
Well, not only think about it, we'll actually do something about it.
Yes. Yeah, indeed. Right, sorry.
That's fine, Chair. I mean, I think we're going back and debate after we've already talked about recommendations, but I think Michelle Burnett made it very, very clear that her last answer laid out what the strategic responses will be, and they're going to take this into account. So I absolutely get what Councillor Bennett's saying, but I have confidence that I think they've heard what we're going to say, and those strategic aims are going to be met by including the south. So I wouldn't necessarily want any different change to the strategy, but I thought that answer gave us what we needed.
That's what I felt personally. So, sorry, Councillor Gooch.
Well, just on that note, it is already, you know, a strongly worded and positively worded strategy document, isn't it? And it does say priority 5 modular and meanwhile site strategy. And it does say there, the council will therefore undertake a structured appraisal of modular options. We've got St Peter's Court site, which is Lowestoft, as we know, and then it's got car parks, garage sites, potential meanwhile sites, especially in the south of the district, and then an appraisal of the current market options, etc. The appraisal will consider cost, feasibility, deliveries, timescales, and suitability. And I think what I'd like to see is some kind of report on that back to us within the year, when we're here again this time next year, what has actually happened here. I mean, it's great that we've had all the general discussions going on, and I am mindful of officer capacity, as has already been pointed out with the local government reorganisation and the structure and the research that in the various stages. But that's the bit that we need to know. So it needs to be in the south. I don't know the south particularly well, which is why I sort of steer clear of that particularly. But that's the bit we need. So, you know, the aim should be, you know, by within the year, we've targeted a site in the south, whether that's Kesgrove, Martlesham, Felixstowe, Woodbridge, around that area. And in a year's time, we know that there's a plan of action. I mean, I know it'll be a bit of a swan song, and maybe it will prove that it isn't deliverable, but at least something, a feasibility study will have been carried out. That's thanks.
Is it possible to have such a study in front of us before a year? Because we have got.
Before we review.
Yes.
The next 12 months.
Yes. I mean,
Send you an update email or within
Yeah.
that before we do our meeting, that where we choose what we do.
Yeah.
Just an observation, if I can, is that I assume the officers are going to be. Sorry, yeah, apologies. An observation really. I assume the officers are going to be dictated to by demand, where the homeless are mainly, availability, as in what properties are available or land to put property on. So, you know, those factors are really going to shape what you're actually able to do. So whatever report is, it's going to be dictated to by that. So thank you.
Councillor.
Right, so we're going to have a look, Felix, though, to look at the sites, then you're going to come back to Fern, and she's going to say, well, this site will work, that won't work. We'll identify a short list of sites that we can look at. I can quite easily come back, report myself, save lots of time, and tell you what's happening in the autumn. Yeah? Happy?
I'm not against what we're talking about, but what worries me is that David, for all the best will in the world, is going against what the officer has said, where Michelle is saying, look, we will have a look at this strategically, we'll look at short term and medium, and we'll do it properly. And I get your point, David, I really do, but I wouldn't want, I'm trying to be really practical here, but I know what we need, but I think we should keep it in a strategic framework. That, because David's quite right, well, yeah, we do want more property, but I think Michelle covered that very clearly, that we can do it, but we do it to make sure it fits in with the strategy. I think if we go down that route outside of that, we do run the risk of suddenly tipping the strategy a little bit. I mean, I think I'm confident that the focus is they are going to look in the south and they're going to do it properly. And I'm trying to help you actually, David, because I wouldn't want David to go back to Heather and Michelle and say, right, we found this, and Heather's going, well, actually that sits outside where we were. So I'm just trying to keep the enthusiasm to at least a manageable expectation.
Councillor Bennett.
I think that what Councillor Bevan suggested isn't outside of the strategy. He's just responded promptly. When you look at the strategy and the supply of temporary accommodation in the south is basically zero, I think it's not unreasonable to say what Councillor Bevan said, and I don't think that that's an inappropriate thing.
Can I come in? Sorry, is that okay? I think we can do both, actually. And I think what you're saying is right. I mean, whether we do an annual review or otherwise, we can consider that. I think the important thing with any strategy is that you know what your strategic objective is, you know what the actions are to support the delivery of that objective, and you know what the outcomes are as a result of the action that you've taken. And that might be over the short, medium and long term. And I think the strategy definitely has all of that there. We can articulate that back to you in biannual ways. I don't think that's extra work. If there's a way in which we can prioritise the south and come back with an update that supports that trajectory of monitoring, that means we can do both. So I think we take away the suggestions around what you were saying, Councillor Bennett, around having a session with ward members and so on to understand the concerns around that. But certainly if there's other things that are happening in parallel, there's no reason why that can't happen as well.
Okay, so sorry, Councillor Plum.
I just want to also put into this a reminder that we have been told that hopefully within not many weeks, we're going to hear about 12 places in the south.
Yeah.
So let's hold on to that as part of our
Yeah.
thinking on this one, because that's a positive that sounds like it's on its way through.
Yeah, but I have to say in that particular area, there's 12% of the total, which is a lot more than 12 units. But anyway, I'd like to wrap this up now. So can we go along with Michelle Badette's recommendation that we stick with the strategy? But you guys okay with taking into account what we've said? Okay, David?
Yeah.
Okay, so can I have somebody propose just that? Thank you. It's Councillor Nimney, Councillor Lynch, second. All those in favour, please show. Thank you, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think someone's calling for a comfort break. So can we say 5 minutes? No? Okay. Can you hang on until the Yes.
Chair, we're
Okay.
live.
Are we live? Thank you. Okay, so we come then to item number 6, and this is the cabinet member scrutiny session. So once again, Councillor David Bevan, over to you. Oh,
Yeah, we haven't got any intro, so unless he wants to. say anything.
right. Okay, sorry, I've got a little bit here too. The committee is also responsible for holding cabinet to account, and as part of that, individual cabinet members are asked to regularly attend. This year, our focus is on the impact of LGR on business as usual and the budget efficiencies. Tonight's the turn of Councillor Bevan, cabinet member with a responsibility for housing. His response to the preset questions is on the agenda, and I'd like to ask committee members if they'd like to ask any questions based on what David has already given us. So, committee, over to you. Yep.
Yeah, we've been discussing temporary accommodation, but the real answer is not more TA, it's more general needs, because we really just need houses that people can afford to live in. And we just checked the figures. In Felixstowe itself, there's 200 people in bands A, B, and C, which is in need of urgent need of accommodation in Felixstowe itself. So that the need is there. So happy to take any questions, and I will answer the best of my ability. And when I can't answer, Heather or someone else will as well.
Okay. Yes, could you just repeat the number of that you just said about the housing in
200 in Felixstowe. I'll come back to you on that one. Yeah. Well, but 50% I should think of families and 50% single. Usually that proportion.
Councillor Lynch?
Thank you very much. Obviously, for quite a few of our tenants and that, it's been quite a hard time with the varying changes in fuel prices and electricity and that. Is that going to have a knock-on effect with your portfolio of the housing and the ability to pay rent? Or how are you finding that the sudden changes over the last spell on heating costs and that has affected people paying? Or have we been able to control it to some extent?
Well, I've been really pleased looking at the figures that, you know, we're not in a situation with increasing rent arrears, and it's really down to the hard work of the officers, because we spend a lot of time advising and really try and get people to come to us before the situation gets too bad, so they can elaborate on that.
Oh, well,
So, thank you. Yeah, I mean, just give you some figures. So our income collection rate is, our target is 97.5%. Last year, we were ever so slightly under in Q1 at 95.9%, but have either been at or above target since then. The team work incredibly hard, and it's not just a case of working with tenants to make sure they collect that rent. It's making sure they're able to still, you know, feed and clothe themselves, their children, access, you know, heating, and working with other agencies as well. But we've got at the moment, you know, really good consistent performance in relation to rental income.
Councillor Jeps?
Thank you. Councillor Bevan, under section C, what do you feel your priorities are for the next year? Now, call me slightly cynical, but that seems to be a cut and paste of a strategic document. And it would probably have been useful at that point to have actually understood what the priorities for next year were going to be, as opposed to just a list of something that comes from a document. Are you able to, with the team, actually highlight what some of those priorities might be? Because they're not going to be all those. Or you're not going to be able to achieve all those. So what are the main priorities do you see for the next year? Thank you, Chair.
So you're asking me, in each of those brilliant basics, neighbourhood and community, which ones I'm particularly keen on getting done?
You don't have to give me the full list, but out of all those sections, there will be some that are more high priority than others. And I'd be interested to know what some of the key priorities in your portfolio are, rather than just the list of what probably comes from a strategic document.
Okay, well, they're all important. Helen told me to say that. But just go running down it, and this is just, you know, off the cuff really. I mean, total mobile, we must get sorted out. I mean, we brought in the software and it's not been used properly. We need to get total mobile sorted out. Neighbourhood community, domestic abuse, I think we're fairly well on it. We're getting Daha, isn't it? We're progressing on that. Tenancy, so very keen on tenant engagement. That's what one of our focuses at the moment. Safety and quality, we really must sort out the housing stock, because as you know, we were sort of told that 50% was not healthy, but in fact we've got the figures back and we're only 8% non-decent now is the actual true figure. So instead of being 50% non-decent as we were told, we've verified that's 88%, so we're making progress on that. And we've got the Housing Improvement Board, which is meeting regularly to get ourselves out of that hole. And we're talking to the regulator of social housing, so must get that sorted out and get a decent result on that. I'm particularly keen on building more houses because that is how we're going to get out of this problem. So we're looking at that, and I'm talking to I went up to Manchester, talked to some people there, talked to Octopus Capital. I'm meeting Lloyds Bank. We're looking at innovative ways we can finance new house building because we haven't got much money left in the HRA, and local councils haven't got much money, so we need to find ways of financing new build. We don't necessarily want to own the houses, but we just need to have the social housing. So patient capital with pension funds and so on, all they want is to put it in some assets which are secure and get a return and keep up with the CPI. And that's something that we can work with. So it'd be interesting to see what Lloyd's say. And I'm talking to my new reform colleague, who's a county councillor who's very high in the city. He's now the county councillor and he's chairing the Suffolk Pension Board, which has a lot of these people's money sitting in there, which is, we could actually maybe get some social value out of that.
Okay.
Amongst other things.
Can you turn your microphone? Thank you.
I say not really, purely because we've asked Councillor Bevan to come here tonight and to give an update. And what's in that section is just a bullet point of what's in another document. And David's comment is off the cuff. These are the things, and then he spoke generically. I think from a scrutiny point of view, I'm sure we'd have all liked to have heard some considered answers to some of these areas, so that we had. It's not I don't have confidence, but we have confidence that we can't address. I know we can't address all those points. So it'd be nice to have understood what some of the real key areas of priority were and how they were going to be addressed, as opposed to a comment. It may be not fully, David, but off the cuff means I haven't given a lot of thought. So I'm just going to tell you off the top of my head that I think strategy is an understanding where our priorities lay and how we're going to deal with them is really important.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Gooch.
Yes, thank you for the overview. Specifically, a couple of details, if I may, and forgive me, the rest of the committee. I'm going to sort of zero in on a couple of areas of Lowestoft North, which isn't my ward, but has been really significant in the town. The St Peter's Court demolition. There were hiccups there. Things have taken longer than expected. It's incurred extra costs. Where are we now on that? It has been mentioned in terms of the land use as a potential for modular or further development. So I'd like some specifics on that area. And I also wanted to ask about the Hollingsworth Road case, but I'll come back to that because it's a separate one. Thanks.
Okay, St Peter's Court, very frustrating. We had the mobile phone aerial at the top there, so we had to sort that out, find them somewhere else to go before we bring it down. that is now sorted out, and we're sorting the asbestos now, ready to demolish next year, and it will happen next year. Then once we've got that down, then we can start looking at what we're going to do. So we've got the idea for a meanwhile use for pods, but we're going to start looking at, you know, what sort of accommodation we could put there. I don't think we're going to go for a high rise again, because the regulations on that are just so stringent these days. We talk about having to have two staircases, fire escape and so on. But you can do a lot on sort of higher density than normal, so 4 or 5 stories, something like that, would fit really well there. And it's that part of Lowestoft is right for a little regeneration there. So that will be coming in due time. The first thing is to get down the present building, and we've got to congratulate the team, making sure that nobody was forced out of Lowestoft and everybody got rehoused there. It's been a bit of a hit to our numbers from the stock, because that means we lost 90 flats. So it's just another reason why we need to build more.
Come back on that one, just a follow-on question then, a supplementary, as it were. The duration for the demolition, you're saying next year, that's next calendar year? Is that from the January, or next municipal year from the May?
I was saying calendar year.
Does it, and in terms of the council tax liability, are there any negative financial implications for the council for leaving it that long to empty? Because we're charging ourselves or something, aren't we, on this one? Because they're vacant flats. So thanks, a bit more detail on that would be welcome.
Yeah, there is a little bit of work there. We're just charging ourselves some extra. No model. Okay, yeah, the alternatives we got round.
It's a loophole, but you get, when you first decant a building, it will not be removed by the valuation office, even though we just made the decision, or cabinet made the decision, that the property was no longer suitable. It's what we're calling the soft strip stage at the moment. So all the asbestos is being removed, but also all of the kitchens, the bathrooms, and all the walls that divide the flats. So no officers can go on site at the moment because it's a live asbestos removal zone. But in effect, each floor now is just completely open. That means the property is completely uninhabitable. So we're no longer being charged council tax. We are working with the valuation office for that to come off. We're also been having some independent survey done to confirm that actually a lot of the works we were doing some time ago meant we weren't liable for council tax, with the view that we should be able to claim that back.
Sorry, who would we claim it back from? Who pays us then?
Well, it's the HRA and the general fund. I mean, the empty homes officer works out of the general fund, not the HRA. So it would be the general fund robbing the HRA. But
we're just transferring. Okay, right.
Could I just ask you, if you're asking a question, can you do so through the chair? Because otherwise the meeting becomes very difficult to manage. So do you want to ask a question?
Does it cost money to move it between accounts, or?
no, not really. It's just moving. It's just changing different accounts. Yeah, doesn't cost.
Okay, Councillor Corley.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to inquire really, because we talked about these 200 people homeless. Have we, because I was trying to look and see if there is actually a forward plan of how many more will be joining that. You know, I know that you're looking at early warning signs and everything else, but are we just going to constantly be playing catch up, or, you know, what is the realistic view, you know, in 18 months' time of how many people will be homeless, with unemployment going up, financial pressures, businesses collapsing? Not looking doom and gloom, but it really is a bit of a tricky situation. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, and just be clear, when 200 wasn't homeless people, that's 200 people in urgent need of accommodation. So they're not registered as homeless. They're just on the waiting list, really. But the general question you're asking is how can we predict, what's going to happen in terms of homelessness? Well, we can't, but we can see all the pressures. It's 1,400 a month, I think, is the average rent in the private sector now for somewhere to live, and most people can't afford that. And I think our average rent is 8 times the average salary. Back in the day, you couldn't get a mortgage for more than 4 times your average salary, so it's just unaffordable. So it's not going to get any better, I'm afraid.
Councillor Lynch.
Thank you. I've always been known as quite a big lateral thinker, so I thought, as it's yours, have we ever considered the amount of waterway we've got? There are some parts of this country, most notably obviously the Thames, where they've spent stupid amounts, but putting houses, i.e. floating houses, which can suitably house 1, 2, they're the normal sizes, on some of our rivers, our Lathing and Lothing, and when you look around our area, we've got an awful lot of waterfront, an awful lot of rivers. Some of that I don't know how much we might even have the land or the access, and some of those boats that for living on are generally around about that 80 to 90,000 pound mark for the single person, and obviously goes up for the 2. But is that something that has ever been considered as a council? Because looking at where we are and our needs, that might be an option that sounds a bit daft, but might be possible.
I'll let Heather have a word in a minute, but there are minimum room sizes and that sort of thing we have to comply with. I think I do actually agree with you. And you go to Holland, you go to Denmark, so when you see people living aboard on these places, and if you look at Kirkley Waterfront, Brook Marine, that's probably a lot better idea than trying to build up the thing. So it's something worth considering, I think, but I don't think Heather would be too pleased at the moment. We'll see what she says.
I understand there are now companies that specifically build for people to live in these on them. They're not based on a boat. They're designed as a home on water and start off with a concrete base. But just a thought.
Could I remind the committee that we need to focus on the input on LGR at these sessions and also budget efficiencies? So if you could just bear that in mind, please. Right, Councillor Bennett first.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it just happens that is where my question is, or my line of questioning is. In that the section, Councillor Bevan, of B, are you anticipating any impact of LGR? I'm sort of lacking. I'm feeling there's a bit of a lack of detail there in the responses in the second, on the right-hand column. For example, on where it says 4 private sector housing refers to Safe Suffolk renters. I'm kind of left a bit none the wiser as to what that, for example, means for us as East Suffolk Council. It only operates in East and West. Even that, I don't know what that is. I mean, East Suffolk and West Suffolk, current East Suffolk and West Suffolk councils. And just generally, I don't think if you look at what's being asked in terms of what we're going to continue, pause or stop, what are the risks in terms of service delivery, performance, budget, reputation. I appreciate that probably at the moment, that's probably might be difficult to nail down some of those things, or it's just in the LGR work stream. But I would have liked to have seen a little bit more meat on the bones, or a bit more detail and specifics on that in that area.
The Safe Suffolk Renters is a county-wide operation. I chair the housing board, the Suffolk Housing Board, so we've worked with other councils already, and we're in the discovery phase of the LGR at the moment. So we're not deciding any policies, we're not putting priorities in, we're just seeing what people are doing. And one of the things we're hoping is that Mid Suffolk may come along and join the Safe Suffolk Renters, because it's, especially with the Renters' Rights Act coming, there's improving the private rented stock. So it's early days, yeah, really, is the answer.
I mean, but even what you've said there, David, could have been a useful bit of context to put in here. You know, that sort of thing. I just felt it was a little bit light on what this might mean. I think for yourselves, it probably you're probably, and your department's probably feeling this is, you know, it's in train, it's going to be okay, etc. But I think for us reading it, I don't feel that that's quite as much clarification as there could have been in that area of what LGR might mean in sort of nuts and bolts, or what could happen, and like risk, for example.
I think what I would say is I would concur with what David said. It is early days. We're still in the discovery phase. We haven't reached the end of that process yet. So all the information is still being collated to understand exactly how services are being delivered between the different local authorities. And I think until we get to a position that we start analysing some of that information, we won't necessarily fully understand what all of the risks are. So I think if we were asked this question in 3 months' time or 6 months' time, I think you'd get very different answers to what you're getting today. But at the time this was produced, we are still very much in the thick of the kind of discovery phase and pulling all that information together to help us then inform exactly what the risks will be in a bit more detail.
Before we go any further, I think it would be really good to just say that we're interested in what the impact of LGI is having now, not what might happen, you know, the day-to-day running of the council and your departments in particular. Okay, Councillor Nimley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at page 140, the Assets Investment Programme, and I note I think you've got 4 schemes there to improve heating within the properties that we are responsible for, but I don't see anything at all about cooling. I think Paris lost 4,000 elderly folk as a result of the last heat wave they encountered. Have we put any thought into what we can do for cooling as well as heating properties? And the other question I'd like to add on is viability for new developments, which is B. At the strategic planning meeting, we had a discussion about the North Felixstowe Garden neighbourhood. And we did ask what was happening, and we were told that the application has been paused. And I asked the question, do we actually have an agreement between the 3 landowners? And they were unable to answer that question, David. I don't know whether you can. Do we actually have an agreement between the 3 landowners? Thank you.
Right. If I could have one question at a time at my age, it'd be handy,
Yeah,
but
I know the feeling.
I'll remember it. Okay, so we're sorting out the heating, but not the cooling. Our main way of sorting out, making sure that people can afford to heat their house, so on, is what's called fabric first. In other words, improving the insulation of houses. Well, the insulation can keep somewhere warm, but it will also keep somewhere cool. And if you go to Paris, where they've historically had warmer summers than us, they have lots of blinds. So you put the curtains over, put the blinds, stop the sun coming in. So one of the main things we're doing with the warm £12 million warm homes retrofit program is to put in double glazing windows and triple glazing in some cases, which means that it keeps it cooler. Extremely important. Ventilation is important as well, and that's another thing that we're looking at. But you're right, we need to look at the heat in the summer, because what was it, 2,000 people, they were extra deaths over recent heat wave and that sort of thing. So it's not just the fabric of the house, but we need to look at having trees around the place and shade and so on. But it's important. Viability, yeah, we could go on a long time on that, but Michelle knows what's happening with North Felixstowe Garden neighbourhood, don't you?
Yes, so the answer to that is, as David said just now, but also earlier, there's been quite a lot of negotiation with the landowners in respect of viability to make sure that whatever we do is affordable for all and satisfies the ambitions for affordable housing, because naturally we don't want to reduce those levels on the basis of trying to make something financially work. So we've been having lengthy conversations on viability with agent to agent really taking place. Because of the way in which the master plan has been currently designed, there's something called equalisation, which means, you know, there's a relationship between those landers we have to negotiate. So your question is, do we have a signed, sealed and delivered agreement? The answer is not quite, but we're close to it. The intention, though, is making sure that whatever we put together satisfies both the residents, it satisfies the landowners, and it satisfies ourselves. So we're not quite there yet, and that's why it's taken some time, is because we've had to reassess the viability based on the issues that David's just mentioned.
Thank you.
In the event we don't have a agreement, can each of the landowners pursue their own developments if they wish?
Yeah, I mean, if we don't have a development, they've at any time at liberty to put in an application, a call for sites, and with the way the planning is at the moment, with the tilted balance, they may well get it. So that is the risk if we don't have the master plan, we get whatever we're offered. I will say that we are looking at flexibility. I know Homes England, the government, is particularly keen on social rent being 60% of new houses, but if we had a bit more affordable rent, which is not extremely expensive, but slightly up above social rent, would mean that we could actually get more affordable housing, keep more affordable housing in the development. So that may be, again, we could look at, and we're talking about that as a way of increasing the viability, but still providing affordable housing. Because don't forget that a lot of the people who need the housing are not the people right at the bottom, you know, that need social rent. The social rent is half of market rent. If someone can pay 70% market rent, it means that we can build more because there's more income coming in, and it makes things more viable. We've got to look at these things. In London, they dropped the affordability ratios down to 20% simply because nothing was happening, nothing was getting built. So we have to be certainly pragmatic, but we're not going to let people get away with dumping affordable housing.
Right, thank you very much. Councillor Black.
Thanks very much, Chair. Could I just return to what was said about the question of council tax being paid on St Peter's Court? Because from what I could sort of understand from what was said, the inference was that it was cost neutral, basically, that the council paid council tax and then received it. But of course, we know that's not true, because East Suffolk's share of the council tax, the total council tax payable, is less than 10%. In fact, it's 8.47% currently. The rest goes to county and obviously the police force. So my question is, how much has actually been lost to the council due to this council tax liability having been racked up? Thank you.
Okay, we'll come back to you with the figures outside the meeting. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Councillor Jepson.
Thank you. I don't know when this report was prepared, but I did wonder if there would have been something within the report about this strategic housing review that we had. The peers came up and looked at, we invited them up, and I would have thought there would have been something in this document to have given us an update on how that went and any recommendations and the action plan. I don't, unless I've missed it, I can't see it in there, and I thought it should have been.
At the time the report was submitted, we haven't received, and even today we still haven't received the report from the peer challenge. So we had the initial feedback session, which Councillor Jepson, you attended. We're in regular communications with the Local Government Association, and they're going through their sign-off process. They're expecting the report to be with us sometime next week. So once we've got that, we will review it, and we will then create an action plan, which will be reviewed by the Housing Improvement Board and the Oversight Board, and I'm sure we'll probably go to Cabinet for consideration as well. But that's the reason why it's not referenced, because we haven't received it yet.
Okay. Right. Any more questions? Councillor Gooch.
Can I just come back on my part two on Hollingsworth Road? Again, just about financial liability. It's the one case that's given as an overspend in D on page 138. Hollingsworth Road, which is North Lowestoft, decant of dwellings due to severe erosion infestation. And then we've got what's the impact of the overspend. Costs for remedial works are still being determined, but costs associated with the displacement, presumably of the people, the rehousing of said tenants or tenants, compensation and surveys to date, currently around 80,000. So there are two parts to this question. One is, did we need to be in this position in the first place? Were there not enough alarm bells ringing earlier on that this was likely to result in such necessary action? And then that's 80,000 to date, but what might the likely final spend be? Thanks.
So I would say no, we couldn't preempt that this would happen. Having worked in social housing nearly 25 years, I've never known us to have to decant a block because of a rodent infestation. It is an extremely unusual case. Where there had been previous infestations and they'd been dealt with, because you do get rodent infestations quite often when there are shops below flats. It's not a rare occurrence, but what this is an exceptional case in the sense that it was such a severe infestation. But from when we'd had the most recent reports, after we'd previously carried out remedial works, it was about 4 to 6 weeks from that first report for us doing investigations to making the decision to decant and rehouse people. The costs mentioned here are very much in relation to the rehousing, the displacement of the residents, the temporary accommodation costs we spent initially, but also some of the surveys. What we can't articulate at this moment in time is what the potential longer term cost is. Because we've decanted the block, we're having some more intrusive surveys done to look at actually, can we, while it's empty, do some more work with it? You know, what can we do under the warm home scheme? How can we make it much more family efficient? There's a lot of benefits while it's empty to being able to do something quite dramatic, quite more on a sort of regeneration basis, rather than looking at each flat being occupied, doing it on a piecemeal basis. So we're taking the time to get those surveys done to give us a fully informed cost appraisal, which we can then decide what the next steps would be.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the committee? No, well, I have one actually. Page 138 to do with efficiencies, the very last one, the DLO operations review. Would you like to elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, the DLO hasn't been working as well as it should. We brought in this new program, Total Mobile. When it was brought in, we're not using it to the full functionality. So we've got some training on that and extending the program. So that is in process to get that going. Once we have that sort of software, then we can produce the dashboards, and the dashboards at the end of this month, aren't they? Mm-hmm. So that
no, not that one. That'd be a bit under that.
Okay. Well, there will be dashboards so that councillors can see how we're doing on repairs and so on, with the length that it takes and so on. So it's an area of the department, amongst other things, that we've had to improve, and we're in the process of improving it. It's really extremely important that repairs are done for tenants. It's very challenging. There's a skills shortage. Sizewell is sucking up a lot of the electricians and so on. We don't pay as much as some of the private sector, so our workforce are quite a lot of them are on the elderly side. So it's important that we're starting to train up young people. Yeah, so it's very much in focus, the DLO, to get that working properly. It's not the fault of the officers at the moment. It's just that we need the structures there. We need to get in the modern world with proper use of the software. There's no point just getting software and then having pen and paper alongside it. The workforce needs to buy into that as well. So it's work in progress on that one.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more questions? your last opportunity. Okay, so then I move on then to agenda item number 7, the work programme for 26 and 27. The work programme has been updated following discussions at the last meeting to split the item scheduled for the September meeting to enable a review of the rollout of better recycling to take place. This will now be conducted on Thursday, the 24th of September, followed by the review of DSSL. We need to officially make that the case. So from the chair, I'd like to propose we do just that. Thank you. That's Councillor Lynch's second. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. And on that note, I'll say that the business has been concluded. I'd like to thank the officers for their input. It's been a very interesting evening. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Councillor Bevan, and to the committee. Thank you all very much indeed. And on that note, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you. Can you just all stay in situ whilst we stop the transmission?